The War Powers Resolution. The year was 1973. Richard Nixon was president of the United States, and U.S. troops have been fighting in Vietnam for nearly 18 years, all without an official declaration of war. This prompted Congress to pass the War Powers Resolution of 1973, preventing any future precedent from involving the U.S. in an undeclared war. Congress had traditionally declared war or authorized the president to use military force against enemies beyond its borders, a power granted exclusively to them by Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. In the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, these were all declared by Congress. But after World War II, things got a bit fussy. Some presidents started taking military liberties with their role as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, a power also granted by the Constitution. In 1950, President Harry Truman sent U.S. troops to help defend South Korea against North Korean invaders. He called it a police action, so technically it wasn't a war. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy sent supplies and military advisors to South Vietnam. Less than a year later, U.S. troops were fighting in the Vietnam War, including in the Gulf of Tonkin, all without the official declaration. And then, again in 1969, President Richard Nixon began bombing Cambodia in secret hidden missions from both Congress and the American people. It took more than a year for this information to leak to the public, and it wasn't until 1973 that Congress ordered an immediate end to bombing raids. But at this point, Congress realized more needed to be done to check the power of the president when it came to war. So on November 7th, 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution. The deal was to ensure that Congress and the president agreed on war actions before committing troops into hostile situations. There are a few key parts to the War Powers Resolution. First, the president must consult and report to Congress before sending troops overseas, though he or she can initiate sending troops in the case of an attack. Second, if the president initiates a hostile action, it can only last for 60 days plus a 30-day withdrawal. Then, Congress has to vote on whether it can continue, unless Congress can meet because of an attack on the U.S. mainland. And finally, if forces have been deployed that aren't acting on a declaration of war, the president must remove them at direction of Congress. Although the War Powers Resolution had broad bipartisan support, it didn't pass without a fight. After they passed the bill, President Nixon vetoed it. Nixon argued that it violated the constitutional powers of the president and that the only way to limit the president's role as a commander-in-chief would be to amend the Constitution itself. But Congress voted again and overrode the veto. The War Powers Resolution became law. Despite the resolution, presidents and Congress have still been at odds when it comes to military action. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan deployed several U.S. military advisors to El Salvador without reporting to Congress. Some members of Congress filed a federal lawsuit, but the court dismissed the case. In the 90s, President Bill Clinton sent forces to Kosovo, and troops remained there for more than the 60-day limit. This resulted in another lawsuit from members of Congress, but once more, the federal court refused to intervene. So while the War Powers Resolution has limited the president's ability to send troops overseas, the branches of government still wrestle over their powers, which is exactly what the nation's founders intended. Next is a video of Barack Obama and his situation in Libya, which gave an example to the War Powers Act.
Military action in Libya began 59 days ago. Now, the president may be on the brink of breaking the law if he continues the mission without congressional approval.
bring democracy to Libya while shredding the Constitution in the United States.
At issue, the 1973 War Powers Act, which says if the president does not get congressional authorization 60 days after military action, the mission must stop within 30 days. The president formally notified Congress about the Libya mission in this letter March 21st, which makes tomorrow the 60-day deadline. Inaction is roiling lawmakers on the left.
He cannot continue what he's doing in Libya without congressional authorization. And when a president defiantly violates the law, that really undercuts our effort to urge other countries to have the rule of law.
With rare agreement from the right.
I mean, no more important decision than sending someone to war who could lose their life, and yet we're going to have no debate on it. The people's representatives would not be allowed to debate on it. I found that really appalling, and it's a terrible precedent.
To be sure, presidents in both parties often ignored another part of the War Powers Act, that the commander-in-chief should get congressional approval before military action. But it's virtually unprecedented for a president to continue a mission beyond 60 days without a resolution from Congress. The administration is deliberating what to do.
We are actively reviewing our role going forward. Throughout, the president has been mindful of the provisions of the War Powers Resolution and has acted in a manner consistent with it. He will continue to do so.
Angry lawmakers in both parties say part of the problem is their own congressional leaders are not raising a stink.
But very few people are talking about this. They're just letting the president do whatever he wants. And I think that's Congress abdicating the rule of law and abdicating constitutional restraints that they should obey.
Some of my colleagues would just as soon not do our job because this is a difficult.
Next is a video of Trump and his take of the war powers.
U.S. strike in Iraq that killed Iran's top commander.
We took action last night to stop a war.
I think what's so dangerous about this moment is that the president seems to be claiming that he and he alone can make the decision to kill a high-level government official of another country. He doesn't have to consult Congress. He doesn't have to tell the American people. That puts us in a situation where democracy is really at risk. Ordered a strike to kill just a high-level government official for the government of Iran. And in response, Iran, a few days later, struck U.S. air bases in Iraq. If the president wants to take a significant military action, what he should do is go to Congress and explain why that strike is necessary, particularly a strike like this that has the potential to ignite a regional war. It has become easier for presidents to take the nation to war now than probably ever before. And that's partially because every president kind of pushes the envelope a little bit further.
We have intervened to stop a massacre.
Think, for example, of President Obama's decision to use military force in Libya in 2011. And when he did that, he didn't seek congressional authorization. We're in a really dangerous moment where President Trump seems to be claiming that he alone gets to decide whether to wage a war. And if he gets away with it, what that does is it suggests that one man can wage the world's most destructive power without having to go to anyone for advice, for consent, or even inform them. It puts American lives at stake. Young people are going to go fight and die for their country. That is the kind of decision that requires and deserves a full-scale democratic debate. What we're discovering from the events that have unfolded is that Congress really has let its war powers atrophy. Over the last several decades, the president has gotten more and more and more powerful, and Congress has generally been pretty content to sit on the sidelines. So one silver lining of all of this might be that suddenly people realize that the war powers situation has gotten completely unbalanced. And what this might open the door to is more full-scale war powers reform.